Welcome to the Lantern Cinema Podcast, part of a film society for the initiated, people who love to discuss pulp, revival, and classic films and film history. Today, we're talking about 1975's Robert Altman's Nashville. And joining me via Skype are Hannah and Dustin Harmson.
Hello.
Hi.
Were you waiting to see who was going to start first? Yeah.
I feel like I always just butt in there. How are you guys doing?
I try to also alternate whose name I say first. I don't know if that ever influences your reactions to who speaks first then.
I noticed I was first that time. I will say that.
For me, I'm always just like, once you say our names, I'm like, oh shit, we got to say something now. Because it just feels so definitive. We're starting the show. So yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking, Hannah.
Over to you, Chris.
Yeah.
I'm doing fine.
Yeah, how are you holding up? We're sick of each other. We're quarantined together, so
I'm sick of my cat.
Is it?
Chris and JoJo.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it's fitting. This is, no one will know this, but it's a little later recording for us doing this. I think we're going to have slightly more sultry voices. We're going to be talking about a nearly 3-hour epic film. So, typically in Lantern podcast fashion, our shows are longer than the movie. So hopefully in this case that won't happen. So, yeah.
This is a 2-hour, 41-minute runtime, which I think is the longest we've done on the podcast.
I think you're right, yeah.
Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like maybe There Will Be Blood is probably similar length. We've probably screened something around here, time-wise.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we had to we did a screening of There Will Be Blood for people who weren't there, and it was the only time we've done an intermission.
Which was cool, right?
Ish. Yeah, it was. And yeah, it was good. We had milkshakes there.
Yeah, we did it right.
Yeah. But it was weird to place an intermission in a film that didn't include it.
Yes, definitely. Wait, before we get rolling here on this show, we want to say thanks to the people who have liked and subscribed and given us reviews, and we would like to
keep it going. Keep it going.
Keep it going.
I had found that halfway through. I don't know if you realized that, but yeah. So just keep. We've noticed a few people have been, like Dustin said, liking, subscribing, and it's a big help. So thank you. While you're in quarantine, if you happen to listen and you like this show, then please do so, because it's super appreciated by the three of us.
The show's on YouTube, so there's a whole nother place to like and subscribe. Should you like YouTube?
Yeah.
Still audio only for the time being, but we're there.
Mm-hmm.
New barrier broken.
Yep. That's right. So keep doing that. Thank you to everyone who's listened. And once again, make sure to listen at the end of the show if you're curious what the next one we're going to do is. So
and always feel free to send emails, thelanterncinema@gmail.com. I don't know if you want to suggest a movie or guess what we look like from our voices or something.
Yeah, whatever it is you'd like. So with that, I think we should jump in and watch this trailer.
Robert Altman's Nashville is 5 days in the lives of 24 unforgettable people. That's a lot of characters, so listen closely. Lily Tomlin is a gospel singer who strays just a bit when she has a one-night stand with Keith Carradine, a hot young rock singer. Ned Beatty is her husband, who doesn't suspect a thing.
Henry Gibson is the #1 country and western singer who's being tempted to run for governor. His sidekick, Barbara Baxley, drinks a bit and talks a lot. And his son, Dave Peel, is sort of attracted to Geraldine Chaplin, who plays a star-struck reporter from BBC TV.
Ronnie Blakely is the adored singing star on the verge of a breakdown. Alan Garfield is the husband trying to save her life and her career. Scott Glenn is the quiet soldier who worships her from afar. Karen Black is the rival singer who dresses like a sweet little prom queen. But don't let that fool you.
Michael Murphy is the campaign manager who'll promise anything, especially to Gwen Wells, a waitress who dreams of being in the spotlight and may have to do a lot of things she never dreamed of to get there. Robert Doakey is the one man who tries to tell her the truth.
Shelley Duvall is the wide-eyed groupie doing what all groupies do so well. Keenan Wynn is the uncle who doesn't understand this wild girl in the sequined hot pants. David Hayward is the sensitive young boy who answers the room for rent sign and who has a big surprise in store for everyone.
Christina Raines is the female singer in a trio who's married to one of them, Alan Nichols, but spends a lot of time with the other one. And David Arkin is the chauffeur who knows all the inside stories and is ready to tell them.
Timothy Brown is a black singer who's made it, but not everybody is happy about that. Jeff Goldblum is the cycle freak who's everywhere the action is. Barbara Harris is the would-be superstar who's running away from husband Burt Remsen, who's chasing her through the wilds of Nashville.
Nashville is about a lot of things and a lot of people. See all 24 of them and the outrageous things they do in Robert Altman's Nashville.
Robert Altman's Nashville.
For movie lovers.
The damnedest thing you ever saw.
Okay, I don't know about you guys, but I feel that trailer was unlike any trailer that we have seen, certainly as a group together. I think it's the most different trailer that I've ever witnessed ever.
I think it's the worst trailer I've ever seen.
I totally disagree, yeah.
You disagree?
I 100% disagree.
No, I think, why would they have, it's just blurbs of each character. I don't get. Okay, so you, Chris, did you like it? Like, I felt just so turned off by that trailer.
I guess I lean toward liking it. I don't feel super strongly about it either way. I guess if we broke down the definition of a trailer, maybe it's not the best trailer, but it did feel like a good advertisement. It was just here are things to expect, here are things that are happening, here's a slice of life about a bunch of characters, which is kind of a mini version of what the film is.
Yeah.
I do think maybe they're less spoilery than some trailers get nowadays, but they do at least hint at a major spoiler. They call specific attention to one character and something that they have to show.
Yeah, it was. I think I remember the wording. It was something like, and what was that actor's name? David Hayward is Kenny, the loner who has a big surprise for everybody, or something like that.
Yeah, which is pretty badass, right? Yeah.
Disagree.
Chris, I'm sorry, you dropped out right there. Would you mind saying what you said again?
Well, it's of course I'm going to pay attention to this character every moment they're on screen now. I'm just going to wait for them to do a
What's
thing.
the surprise? Is it kittens?
But it was between him and the army dude, where I'm both of these seem like sketch people for different reasons. Which one of them is going to be the bad one?
Yeah, exactly. And I thought, and as we're going to be describing the major characteristics of Robert Altman and what his movies are like, I thought it was so within the fashion of one of the characteristics we're going to talk about, which is more or less turning the idea of what a Hollywood film is on top of its head. So within this trailer, you kind of grow to expect a certain type of thing. All of a sudden, if I was in the theater, I would just be like, okay, and what in the fuck is this going to be? It was just so, I thought it was so exciting.
Better get my $1.75 and go see this thing.
With that said, though, I'm trying to think, some of the trailers we've watched, for instance, we did It Happened One Night, and there was a trailer that's a movie from, what is it, 35 or something like that.
Better get my 25 cents and go see this thing.
Well, it's interesting to see the history of trailers, and we haven't done any other ones kind of from around this time period, so it would be interesting to see if it was similar to what trailers were like at that time. But myself, talking as recording this now, I can't wait to cut that trailer into this particular show, so I'm really excited about it. Yeah, so I guess with that, Hannah was the one previously who, this was Hannah's pick this week, and Hannah's made no bones about it. This is Hannah's favorite film. Anytime anyone asks her, she always lets everyone know Nashville's her favorite.
There's a little caveat there.
Okay, what's that?
Because I think anytime you ask somebody what's your favorite song or what's your favorite movie or what, whatever, I think the answer changes based on the situation you're in. There's some songs I like based on nostalgia that I wouldn't necessarily be attracted to now. There are movies that, if I know, this sounds very snotty. I really don't mean it that way. But if I know people like new movies or whatever, there's an answer I might give for that, because I don't want, you know.
Oh, I see. You
does
don't
that
want
make
to
sense?
you
Like,
don't want to alienate somebody.
yeah, I don't want to just go off on my little tangent of like, well, Robert Altman, the 1970s. And so usually it kind of comes down, like my actual, like what my heart tells me my favorite movies are. It's always between this one and then Dustin brought up La Strada the other day. And I was like, oh yeah, that's my actual favorite movie too.
Yeah,
So,
the Fellini film.
so I'd say, and the two movies are so diametrically opposed. Like they're so different. I like La Strada for the story and, you know, just kind of the really simple filmmaking. It's unlike Fellini's groundbreaking stuff, and that's almost why I like it. But Nashville's the opposite. It was like this technical feat and kind of this hallmark film from the 70s. It changed a lot about sound and how films could be made. It has this huge ensemble cast. There isn't really a set step-by-step story. It's not following the classic story structure, but it's like a bunch of, you know, like Robert Altman would say, a bunch of happy accidents. And it's essentially, I mean, it's a musical. 30% of the movie is music. And I actually really like that. And
Yeah.
I think if you'd talked to me 10 years ago, I wouldn't have, even though I think Dustin always points out that the music of my soul is probably like 70s and 60s country.
Yeah, we're not going to make her, but I just want everyone who's listening all over the place just understand that Hannah can sound like any of the singers basically from this entire movie. It's actually quite the talent that she has, but I'm lucky enough to live with it.
Yeah. I will never, ever do it for any of you. But I can imitate perfectly almost every female singer.
Yeah, Hannah, you know, the music of Hannah
I was
is
going to ask
this
if you could
country
do
music.
Henry Gibson.
Yes.
Not Henry, keep it going.
Yeah, keep it going. Yeah. Yeah, well, Hannah, I guess I want to pose to you, was this your first Altman film then? The first time we watched this, was it together? I think it was, right?
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
God, no, I saw Prairie Home Companion in theaters.
And you loved that movie.
I really
remember
liked
you
it.
talking
I know
about
it's
that
not
to
the
me.
fave, and it was his last movie. It had Lindsay Lohan in it, but you know, whatever.
She was okay in it.
She was.
Yeah.
I think Lindsay Lohan's a pretty swell actress, but no, I actually really enjoyed it, and I'd never seen a movie like that before because I'd never seen an Altman film before. And I really liked the show Prairie Home Companion because I come from some really great Midwestern liberal parents who played NPR all the time. So the pieces came together for me when I got into Altman later, and I realized like, that was actually really special that I got to see that in theaters, even though I had no idea who he was as a director in, what was it, 2007, 2006?
When that film came out?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 2006 stands out to me.
Yeah. Well, you're
Apologize
just
if that's wrong. No, I think it is because I'm thinking of a couple things with There Will Be Blood.
But yeah, I think this was probably the first one I saw, and since then I've really gotten to love the music. Like I look forward to the musical numbers and the characters. I've seen a bunch of his movies since then, and this one just strikes a really good balance between being heartbreaking but also funny. Like some of his movies are so heavy I can't handle them.
Yeah.
I'm looking at you, Shortcuts.
Yeah, Shortcuts. Oh my God. Yeah, we'll get into some of those other films.
So that's why I like it.
Yeah, Chris, I wanted to ask you: is this your first then, Altman?
Second. So until 8 days ago, I had not heard of Nashville. Immediately, I was just thinking about the show Nashville, which I also have not seen.
It's ruining all of our Googling, I'm sure.
It really is. It's totally messing it up.
Get out of here, Hayden Panettiere.
Go ahead, Chris.
Sorry, Chris.
But I had seen like the MASH movie, which he had directed. And just growing up at my grandma's place, going there frequently, the show was on all the time. And it's still something that my mom and I will watch together every once in a while when she's visiting. So I've seen the movie, maybe not start to finish in one sitting, but I'd seen that a couple of times. That was the only touchstone that I had for what Altman did until this.
Mm-hmm.
Were you familiar of his legacy? Not so much like as a whole, but what did you understand that like he's spoken within the same breath as like Scorsese and Cassavetes and all that kind of stuff?
I had just known his name.
Yeah.
And then once before watching this movie, I had mentioned to you too pre-show, like I watched the trailer first. I watched a few interviews with him. I watched some Lily Tomlin interviews because she's fantastic in this. And then during all of that, it's like, oh, wait, yeah, everybody's including his name with those other directors from the 70s and beyond as well. So like, oh, Okay, yeah, like I know your name, but there's a reason why I know your name, and I probably should have seen work before now.
Yeah, well, no, it's awesome. Well, and I'm so, I think both of us can say that we're both so happy that you enjoyed the film as much as you were, because I think we're gonna have to discontinue the show if you didn't enjoy it.
And two, it's quite the yoke to put on someone's shoulders to be like, watch this 3-hour movie and tell us if you didn't like it,
and that's
you hated country music.
And that's funny too, because like even though this movie's nearly 3 hours, I've seen this movie a bunch at this point, and the time never freaks me out because I find the movie so enjoyable.
And it's very well paced, and there's always something going on, and none of it feels like filler.
No.
Even though like everything is building into something or connected to something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Ebert who said that a bad movie couldn't be over quick enough, something like this. I'm kind of butchering this quote, and then a good movie couldn't be long enough. So this, to me, fits within that. So,
well, and the original cut was
6 hours long.
Jesus.
For me, the first time, I really drug my feet on the idea of watching Altman because I'm such a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan. And I understood that specifically Boogie Nights and Magnolia were, he borrowed so many elements from Altman, specifically the idea of these long, kind of sprawling stories with all these characters that are, interwoven into this like amazing patchwork. And I loved Magnolia so much I didn't want anything to ruin it, but that would have been foolish of me to have totally just missed out on Altman. I got Nashville, and we immediately were just like obsessed with that movie.
Oh, I couldn't get enough of it. I
couldn't
still
get
can't.
enough of it. Yeah.
And oh my god, I really didn't mean to do that.
What'd you do?
Never get enough. Never get enough.
I love your
hungry part. So and
she's one of those that is funny and tragic.
Oh,
she's
God.
terrific. Sueling Gay.
Sueling Gay.
So the thing I wanted to tell you about was when an Altman's style of directing was just so freewheeling. And when we cast the two kids who were non-hearing, they were really kids who were deaf and could not hear. And the first two kids that came, he hired them. That's great. Those are the kids. Those are our kids. And I saw him do that time and time again. When actors would say, well, what do you want in this scene? And Altman would say, I don't know, why don't you surprise me? And I think that's what endeared him to so many actors, and we just loved him beyond description. He was but he was a scoundrel at the same time, and a big bear of a man, and had great appetites, and he would be smoking weed on every night when we'd watch dailies and drinking. And when I first was there, I said, how is he going to be okay tomorrow? And I come in, and it's like 6 o'clock, he's riding the crane already. He was just magnificent, and he was so forgiving and so okay with everything. And whenever anybody came to visit us on the set, Elliot Gould came, Julie Christie, and Karen Black, and he would put them in the movie.
So, Chris, you actually started with researching about this before you watched the film. Did that impact how you felt about your viewing?
I think the only real influence it had was, I'm already blanking on the character's name, but the key one who leads to a very dramatic and chaotic event in the movie. I just knew to key in on him earlier than I probably would have just watched the movie out of the blue. I was like, okay, I'm just going to keep paying attention to this dude that has this case with him at all times for some reason, but is never open until the end. But aside from that, I don't think it really changed much about how I watched this or what I felt while watching it.
I'm happy to hear that you looked into the interviews and everything with Altman, because he was such a dynamic figure and such a, honestly, every time I get an Altman film, first off, I think me and Hannah always say to each other, like, okay, what does Bob have in store for us this time? Because each one of the films are so different. Altman has often been described as genreless because, you know, all of his movies are almost like anti-genre of whatever the thing is supposed to be. So McCabe and Mrs. Miller is like almost, it's a Western, but it's almost like an anti-Western. Like every one of his movies, this is a musical, but for some reason you almost forget that Nashville's a musical because there's so much, you know, involved with it. But throughout, I'm always so thrilled when you look at the back and it's like, yes, we get a Bob commentary. We get an Altman commentary. He does the most fabulous commentaries and he just feels like the coolest grandpa that you always wish that you had.
Yes.
Did you get a good vibe from him, like listening to him speak?
Yeah, I think I probably checked out like 3 interviews, but they were all like early 2000s-y. So
yeah,
it was
he's
like
great then.
But even just watching those 5 minutes at a time or whatever, he still had like this presence about him and like kind of intense eyes. But yeah. And then like he was just like drinking and like smoking on set every day, but then still getting up at 6 a.m. and working and just being his usual self. Feels right.
Yeah, definitely. Well, maybe this would be a good time for us to actually get into what makes a Robert Altman picture. How do you know that you're watching Robert Altman?
Should we lead into that with a synopsis, or do we want to look for those factors before we...
I think it would be helpful to kind of talk about couple of the earmarks. Hannah actually did a pretty succinct job even describing why she loved Nashville so much, kind of giving some of them. So just to reiterate what Hannah said, specifically, you know, I'd kind of mentioned before, he's really famous for having these kind of huge epic stories. You know, once again, this movie marks nearly 3 hours, and a lot of his movies kind of are similar in terms of length. There's always a lot of film there. Oftentimes it features these huge ensemble cast with oftentimes a very similar, repertory cast almost. He always has very similar actors and actresses throughout all of his films, not unlike a Wes Anderson or a Woody Allen or something like that. People
So if you want Michael Murphy all over the place,
he's your guy.
Get you some Robert Altman.
Shelley Duvall, he's your guy. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, so if you like Nashville, you know, there's so many more movies for you because
that's the exciting thing about Nashville. It's like, if you like this, there's so much more. So ensemble cast, usually it's a very naturalistic style of dialogue because they're talking over each other. And that's the one thing that people usually say, is that in Altman films, it's not, it doesn't feel scripted in the same way because every character is allowed to talk a lot of times over each other. It really kind of mimics natural conversation, and there's a lot of improvisation involved.
Yeah, and he was really an actor's director. He is often described as a maverick within the Hollywood system because essentially he did whatever the fuck he wanted at all times. He basically never got along with any studio head whatsoever. As a matter of fact, some studio head wanted to cut 6 minutes out of his movie, and he got into a fist fight with him about it. So all the studio people, all the wigs, all the bean counters hated him. But in the words of Julianne Moore, who was in Shortcuts, you will never find an actor that was in one of his movies that hated him. They all basically loved him, with the exception of someone in Nashville, actually, which I suppose we can talk about later. But they
I don't know if I know who you mean.
It's the husband of
Garfield.
Yeah,
Garfield. He didn't like him.
He didn't like. Yeah, he did. They got into huge fights, but
okay.
I think Altman kind of go at it in though because he kind of had that dick kind of personality. But
so what else? Okay, so technically, there are some advances that wouldn't. I mean, I don't want to say wouldn't have existed without him, but the way he would mic actors made it, I think I heard multiple times in his commentary, basically when they were shooting Nashville, they were shooting a documentary.
Yes.
It was almost like a happening or like a play set in Nashville where all these people, like in the car wreck in the beginning of the movie, they would all be in their separate cars. They'd all be talking. They'd be in character. They'd be having these conversations with people and kind of running into different people. But they never necessarily knew that they were the ones that were the focus Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So they didn't know if what their conversation was going to end up in the film or not.
Yeah.
And that was enabled because there were so many different mics versus like, you know, everybody has their line. We make sure we catch that line, then we move on to the next scene.
Yeah, and like Hannah said, I think the main thing I want to emphasize is just that idea of the naturalistic dialogue. And that was something that he encouraged within his actors. You know, he had these highly scripted films that he would really collaborate with these screenwriters. But then he would basically like for instance, Geraldine Chaplin, that's in this film, she showed up to the set with her script, and I guess Robert Altman came to the set and just said to everybody like, okay, did you guys all bring your scripts? And they said yeah, and he was just like, okay, throw them all away. He used it as a blueprint. That was the whole idea. So
like you had those great moments where the guy who played Bill from Tom and Mary, he didn't realize that his wife in the movie was cheating on him with Tom until he saw the dailies. Yeah,
and he was in the dailies crying because he was so like heartbroken that she was cheating on him. So I actually have a great quote here so this naturalistic dialogue really encouraged improvisation, and a big part of that was Robert Altman is a director from my own heart here, because he wasn't necessarily interested in plot, admittedly. That was not what he was interested in. He was known to be a keen observer of people, and that was the number one thing he wanted to see. He wanted to see essence as opposed to story.
Which, before you read this quote, Dustin will watch, Chris, I don't know if you know this or not, but he will watch an entire movie and not understand a goddamn thing about what actually happened, but he'll love it. He also liked Last Year in Marion Bad, which I don't understand. So.
That's the second time you slammed Last Year in Marion Bad.
Listen.
First episode, as a matter of fact.
Oh, okay. You've been re-listening, but...
and that speaks to me still, that film.
Okay, quote us.
Here, I would like to quote what Robert Altman said in regards to this. I equate... and this is actually something he said close to the end of his death, not to the end of his death. His death is still ongoing, but towards the end of his life. This is what he had to say.
He's firmly in that stage of his non-life.
He said this about his work. I equate this, meaning making films, more with painting than theater or literature. Stories don't interest me. Basically, I'm more interested in behavior. I don't direct, I watch. I have to be thrilled if I expect the audience to be thrilled, because what I really want to see from an actor is something I've never seen before, so I can't tell them what that is. I try to encourage actors not to take turns, to deal with conversation as conversation. I mean, that's what the job is, I think. It's to make a comfort area so that an actor can go beyond what he thought he or she could do. Robert Altman.
I'd like to add too, you reading that made me think of a quote I literally just heard him say. You were watching an interview before we headed upstairs to record this. Someone was asking what the breakdown was between him and Tewksbury. What's her name?
Joan
Tewksbury,
the screenwriter.
Screenwriter for this one. They were like, so what's the breakdown with your influence versus hers? And he said, well, you know, the screenwriter does 98% and I do too, but my 2% is really big.
Yeah. Well,
Which I think is a good description of what
and I think there was a huge misconception of the fact that his movies were 100% improvised. That wasn't necessarily the case. He would work so hard with the screenwriter and have that script so much in his hands, you know, in his head before going into the film. But then once he got there, he really trusted those actors, and he really felt that the casting was the number one most important thing that you had to nail right away if a film was going to be any good. The last characteristic... Oh, sorry, go for it.
I was going to add, so an example of that, like the scene between Alan Garfield and Michael Murphy at the Parthenon, where they have that argument about whether Barbara Jean's going to perform. He just gave the direction that Michael Murphy's character wins. I don't care what happens in between.
So the fight that you actually see in that scene is so intense and real, so much so that Michael Murphy, the Murph Man, as we...
lovingly refer
at home, he gets so worked up as if it's a real fight, you know, like that moment you're in a verbal fight with somebody and you're like so pissed but almost getting embarrassed about it. There's that great part in that where he goes, now you listen here, Buster. And it's like a fuck up, right? Like it's totally something that wasn't necessarily supposed to happen, but there's something about the reality of that just makes the movie so special. The last characteristic I wanted to say was Robert Altman was very famous for actually, we're talking about this idea of his observations that he put into his films. He was always trying to put his observations of the world out there through these films. So almost every single one of them is an example of satire or some type of critique. Nashville, it is a study of America close to the bicentennial, kind of where it's at. It has this, metaphorical vibe to it, but he also uses humor, so appropriately to get some of these ideas across. So much so that Geraldine Chaplin, who of course was the daughter of Charlie Chaplin, she actually found parallels in the way that Altman used humor, like her dad did. So here's what she said about this. They're both funny in the right type of way, funny in a critical way of what the world is and the world we live in. They were both geniuses in their way. They alter your experience of reality. They have their own world and they have their humor. That humor is so rare.
Yes, I met Robert Altman at a party. A girlfriend of mine, Carolyn Pfeiffer, was there, and she was doing publicity for a film called Images. And she introduced us. And then I met him again at Cannes, and he said, would you like to be in one of my movies? So I got lucky. Oh, I thought he looked a lot like my brother Sidney.
Oh, right.
And he had the same kind of humor, and he was so lovely and incredibly funny. And I thought, oh yes, I would like to work with him. And then afterwards, when I found out the way he worked, I thought, oh, I can't do it. I can't do that. But I did. I mean, he sussed me out immediately as this sort of phony. And I think that's why he gave me the part. He said, you have to be from the BBC, but you're phony. You're actually an American, and you just put on that accent. But be very British, so you'll be bad, because you don't have a very good English accent. And I thought, oh, he's so right. I am phony, and he's so right. And, of course, Opal was such a phony. But and then he said to me, I want you to follow me around and imitate me. And that's going to be the part. So I thought, that's sort of dangerous. And I thought, well, I'll try. And of course, that wasn't the part. But he was such a connoisseur of human beings. And complicated human beings. So he would give me something to do, which had nothing to do really with the part, and then something else would come out, and then all these things would be put together, and they would make a complicated human being. Which, I mean, if you go to films today, I have never, I don't think lately, seen any complicated part. Everything's there's a lot of complicated plots and complicated special effects and complicated, those Transformers are really complicated. But complicated human beings, I haven't really seen many since Robert Altman.
And a lot of people said he had a really fucking weird sense of humor. And me and Hannah, as soon as we finish this podcast, are going to go downstairs and finish a film that was a few films before this one called Brewster McCloud. And it is so funny, but so
what
strange.
The fuck is going on there?
Everyone watch Brewster McCloud. If you enjoyed this, I can't guarantee.
If you enjoyed this or Bud Cort's sweaty butt crack, that's a great. Sorry, Chris.
I think this is good, right? Is there anything else we had to say about any? I think we've pretty much nailed the characteristics. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Nothing right now.
Chris, good luck doing this synopsis. I say that every time, but you always come through in flying colors. So I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
I don't know if this one is difficult or easy.
That's a good point.
But Nashville is a film that takes place across 5 days in Nashville, following the interconnected lives of 24 different characters, one of whom has no speaking lines. And it's set around this semi-loose framing device of the populist oh man, where did I write his name? Oh no. Hal Philip Walker.
Nailed it.
A name I should know because it is sprinkled everywhere throughout the film, including like the intro and just everywhere. It is Hal Philip Walker running for president in the replacement party. And he's having a gala, and they're trying to get all sorts of musicians there. They're trying to get more people there. They're trying to get the word out that this pseudo-Trump-ish person who has run 3 primaries and is trying to win Tennessee, like, is a person worth considering for president, and trying to get this bigger base out in a very conservative town. And it's just about these musicians and these dreamers and these just kind of miscreants, some of them, all usually accidentally ending up at the same places at the same time, culminating in one big dramatic moment at Hal Philip Walker's gala to close the movie. That's what I got.
Yeah.
Nailed it.
If we'd gone into character by character, it would have been a 2.5 hour long synopsis. Hey, so nice job.
This movie, honestly, there's so much to say about it that's kind of even difficult to kind of know where to start. I can say, were you going to say something to start off?
Nope, just breathing.
Okay, got it. I was going to say, go ahead, Chris.
So it is nope, just breathing.
Yeah. I guess we could start just essentially at the beginning of how this movie even started. So that was essentially the note that I made for myself, like, why was this movie even made? So Chris had mentioned earlier that Altman had his first cultural smash with MASH. That was nice. And
nice job.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yep.
So through MASH, Robert Altman really kind of 100% redefined the idea of what a Hollywood movie could be. As a matter of fact, when he was doing MASH, all of the big Hollywood people were like, dude, you cannot have those military fatigues look that dirty. You know, like he was all, you know, they had all these preconceived rules of.
I think Elliot Gould just hated him.
Hated him. Hated the fact that, like, you know, he had all these people talking over each other. He just had no concept of what he was trying to do. And the reason for it was these techniques were so new. Anyways, the point is he changed the landscape of what a movie could be. And he had a huge success with it. And from there, you know, he made other movies leading up to this one. And it was just kind of a runaway success. He's thrown into the same kind of you know, he's in the same likes as Martin Scorsese, Woody Allen, Cassavetes. He basically started to have, you know, cachet within the film industry that he could start making, you know, whatever kind of movies he wanted to. So initially he'd had the idea for a film like Nashville for years and years and years. Originally he wanted it to be about Chicago, but then that idea kind of went by the wayside. Specifically, he was interested in having all of these interlocking storylines that would kind of all, you know, go over each other. But then someone gave him the bright idea of, you know, if you want to make a ton of money in Hollywood, you know, the number one thing you have to do is you just have to make a soundtrack. If you make a movie that has a really great soundtrack, you're in the bucks.
Which you would know from personal experience, because I think he always maintained that his son, who wrote the lyrics to the MASH theme song when he was 17,
I think he was 14, actually.
Are you kidding me?
I think he was 14 years old.
Gross. I think he made more on that than he did on any number of his subsequent films. Yeah. So soundtrack is where it's at.
Yeah, so that's essentially what he started with, and what better place to make a soundtrack album than Nashville?
And that Tewksbury.
Yeah, that's right, Joan Tewksbury.
Joan. I always feel like I'm saying it wrong. Joan Tewksbury just happened to be in Nashville for something else, so he just told her, like, take some notes.
Yeah.
And so the first day she was there, she witnessed a car accident like the one in the film where, you know, a couch falls off a truck, and they just turned her diary into Nashville.
Yeah, that's 100% what it was. She actually so much says that when you're watching Nashville, you're just watching my trip that I took. Basically every single thing. I mean, obviously she was a dramatist, so she could, amplify certain situations, but yeah, like Hannah said, the car crash, some of the locations that she went to, be it a bar or the Grand Ole Opry itself, were all present. So it's fascinating to think that was the case. It's
also a good testament to how a good story can just come from really interesting human experience. Because there is, I mean, are we spoiling the end of this?
Yeah, we needed to say what happens.
Okay. So with Barbara Jean, this, hometown girl, like this hometown hero, country star getting shot at the end, in, this really kind of graphic celebrity assassination. So even though that's like, there are a couple of big events, everything else is kind of just drama between these musicians and, people being jealous of each other and their interpersonal relationships being skewed. And I think that's what makes the movie really interesting, is that I feel like he could have made a movie like Nashville, but he could have made Chicago, or he could have made, Budapest.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's also curious that this movie, released in 75, the bicentennial would have been in 76. Altman had a lot that he was trying to say about the United States, and this is what he kind of made. If you look throughout the film, basically the majority of the color palette, with the exception of all the harsh lights and very Nashville people, I don't know what else to say about it, all the various colors and looks of what people in the 70s look like in Nashville, the palette is red, white, and blue, right? Throughout the whole movie. He's always...
Oh, say that again, Chris, you cut out.
Just from the very beginning, and like everybody that's there to like greet Barbara Jean from the plane and everything, there's just constantly like flags and stuff. That imagery comes up at the very end or before the trigger is pulled. You just like the flag waving, like very white and blue, start to finish.
Yeah, it's very optimistic Americana. It's even like from the very beginning when they have that recording studio shot where they show all the different rooms, where the Henry Gibson character is singing that, that bicentennial, we must be doing something right to last 200 years.
Hyper patriotic song.
Yeah. And with all that said, 200 years is not that long of a time for a country, guys.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never even thought about that.
It is not that impressive.
Yeah, and the film starts, we've talked about these characteristics of, these, going through all the different storylines and all that. Within that opening shot, does he introduce every single character that you're going to be watching for the next 2 hours and 40 minutes? I think
there's like a bookend.
Yeah.
Everyone comes together at the beginning and then everyone comes together at the end.
Yeah. So he had a lot of different things that he wanted to say about the United States.
Race in the United States was, I think, watching it most recently was the biggest thing that we commented on.
Yeah, I was looking
for...
that
false patriotism.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to see, how we kind of... Now, did you pick up on some of those kind of more political undertones of the film?
Yeah, and I do feel like they are undertones for the most part when they are talking about political divides, race and social divides. Like, they're kind of showing different things, but not just very blatantly talking about it for the most part. One thing that I thought kind of telegraphed the ending was Haven Hamilton's wife bringing up the Kennedys multiple times, and then at length for that one scene when even I think it's Opal she's talking to, is like trying to like exit this conversation, and she's just like going on about like when I worked for Bobby, like I had these bad feelings and all this stuff, just like talking about 2 assassinations without even saying that, because I don't think she mentions either of them being killed directly. It's just like understood, of course that's what happened to these 2 people. Was then in my head like, oh, maybe that's what's happening at the end, already knowing to like be looking out for one character. Is like, oh, maybe he's going to be killing one of these performers.
Interesting.
So that was something that made me think about politics and even kind of religious divides, because she's maybe the one character that does kind of go off a little bit on like differences between even just various parts of Christianity and Catholicism disagreeing, and then them disagreeing politically on who to vote for and why Kennedy lost by like 800,000, or not 800, but like 80,000 votes. Like she knew the exact numbers and stuff. It's like, and she was kind of like a big part for me to like see some of what was going on.
Well, yeah.
Along with the like diner line cook, he has a couple of different lines.
Wade.
Even when he's just like calling out, not Tom, but the other
Tommy Brown. Is that
yes,
his name?
Tommy Brown.
And Tommy, yeah. Even when he just kind of like calls him out upon his like introduction into the movie and stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I think something to think about, you know, the idea of the civil rights movement and the Kennedy assassination. How many years are we talking about here since those, you know, within 10 years that would have taken place?
Yeah, it's all within a decade, essentially. Or
so
shortly, I mean, a little over. But
in the case of the assassination, it would have been far along in history. History had went on enough, but it would have still been so present within, you know, their minds. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's just fascinating to think of all those things as you're watching it.
And it's interesting that you picked up on the Kennedy stuff, because this movie kind of predated the idea of, like, you know, the celebrity assassination when John Lennon was shot. You know, that I hadn't thought of that at all, because that wasn't part of the time period that I was raised in, but that's just something that didn't really happen before. The idea of killing someone famous so you could be a part of their legacy in some way.
Right, which is why I've heard in those interviews, like Altman talked about how after Lennon was killed, like receiving a phone call being like, oh, hey, do you feel like you're responsible for this? And him being like, why? No. What? The movie was supposed to be a warning. Like, that was supposed to be an example of something that could happen, and somebody being kind of an outsider, wanting attention or fame, doing something like this. Like, you were supposed to pay attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the politics side, it's interesting, not that it even really had any effect on the movie, but during the production is when Nixon resigned. So it was just like a weird time in general.
Well, and politics is something that pretty much goes throughout his entire filmography, starting with MASH. You know, he was giving ideas about what he thought about the Vietnam War through the Korean War. We're talking about Nashville is obviously just super overtly political. He has a film called Secret Honor, which if anyone is interested in just seeing something you've never seen before, I think Secret Honor is a good example.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah, Secret Honor is a movie that just stars one actor. What's his name again? Philip Baker Hall.
Philip Baker Hall.
Yeah, there's too many similar names.
He's not a serial killer. He just goes by 3 names.
Yeah, who's someone that Paul Thomas Anderson
also not a serial killer.
Yeah. Stole from many of his films as well, but he just plays Richard Nixon, and it's just him essentially going insane in his office after the Watergate scandal. So, and then he went on to do this serial, which is just fabulous, called Tanner 88, if anyone's interested in that, which is really compelling during the primary season right now.
Agreed. I didn't like Tanner 88 as much when I first saw it, because I saw it in like 2014.
Yeah.
It's a lot more interesting of a watch now.
Yeah, so politics was always on his mind, and specifically, you know, he was very much a Democrat. I think everyone knew that he was a Democrat, a liberal kind of personality. So much so that you were talking about who's the candidate that runs throughout this film?
Hal Philip Walker.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said that other one before. Hal Philip Walker. That's right. Yeah. Okay. So much so that essentially what Robert Altman did in this film, it's so brilliant. He essentially hired a novelist who had a name that was very similar to the one you guys just said right there that I'm not going to be able to keep in my head. Anyways, what he did was he hired this novelist to write this campaign.
Thomas Hal Phillips.
There it is. Good luck, everybody. Yeah,
those are similar names.
Yeah. So he essentially had him write a campaign, but the campaign that he had him campaign was basically Robert Altman's political beliefs, or the type of politician that Robert Altman wished existed in this world.
Yeah, I heard he said to write a politician that says the things you want politicians to say.
Right. And specifically what he did was, they hired, they got this truck. He was really excited about the truck that he purchased for this. And he essentially hired this campaign to go around, and he would create the events that were going to take place in a given scene. But he always gave them instructions of, listen, I want you to come through the scene, bring all your people, put stickers all over the place, interrupt the scene. We'll react to whatever it is that you do. They never knew when those people were going to pop up, which is just mind-blowing when you watch it. Mm-hmm. So much of this movie, the word I kept saying to Hannah as we're watching it, it's a very precarious film, where so much of it, there were so many elements that were out of the direct
accidents.
Yeah, they were 100% out of the actors. The actors certainly, but maybe
crew, out of the crew's control.
Yeah, the crew, the director, everyone's control. That if a second would have passed, if they, the film could almost be entirely different. These moments were so effervescent, just amazing.
Well, I was just out of school, out of college, and I was this sort of incredibly naive, wet behind the ears dweeb of an actor who was running around Hollywood trying to get a part. And you'd go into the casting director's office or the producer's office or anybody's office you could get into and play scenes in those days. And you'd be pouring your heart out in some guy's office and he'd be on the phone usually, or, hold that thought, And so it was very grim. It was very difficult. But I was at an age where I didn't know any better. And I had a mutual friend, Bob and I, Catherine and Bob, and I had a mutual friend who worked at a little studio called 4-Star, which was founded by, I think, Dick Powell and Charles Boyer, and it was maybe Ida Lupino or somebody. It was a nice little studio at the time out there, and 4-Star, yeah. And I had a job. They gave me a job. I read it was a television series that was going on, and they would. I used to come in every Thursday and play the guest parts after work when the guys would come in, the regulars, and they'd all sit around the table and read the script. And then I walk in, and then I would act out all the guest parts. I was just loaded for bear when I'd go in there. And the series failed quickly, and this mutual friend of ours was a secretary there, and she said they're doing a show called Combat out at MGM, and my friend Robert Altman does them, and they need a lot of young guys, and so you should meet him. And she made a phone call for me. And I went out there, and it was totally different from anybody I had met. And I had my frame of reference of Hollywood was just sharks in the water, And here was this guy who was just unbelievably down to earth. And he didn't even have a secretary. He was sitting. He had a little funky office under a stairwell. I remember out there, and I crossed that threshold, and I knew I was in the presence of somebody that was really. I mean, within 5 seconds, I knew this guy was something very, very different. And we talked for a long time just about, life and stuff. And at the end of the conversation, he said, well, let's do something together then. And I thought, what a generous, wonderful way to put it, And honest to God, 3 days later, there was a script on my doorstep. No auditions, no nothing. I didn't have a credit to my name. And he cast me as tank driver number 1.
Is that your license plate still?
Should be. And tank driver number 2 was the maitre d' at a famous restaurant in Hollywood, and they used to give them little parts, and then so they could get a good table on Saturday. And he was a lot better than I was in the movie, I'll tell you. But he gave me this chance, and I remember going on the set the first day, and I had a couple of quick lines, and I went up to Vic Morrow and I said, "You want to rehearse? Are we rehearsing?" And he said, "No, he's not going to shoot this stuff." And I said, "Well, what do you mean he's not going to shoot it?" No, he doesn't he never shoots what they write. I said, "Oh." And we just sort of sat around at lunch. My part was kind of delayed until the afternoon, and he said to me, "What do you want to? What would you say? What do you want to say?" And I said, I don't know. What do you want me to say? You know, it was one of those things. And I left that day thinking, first of all, let me just interject. He treated me, here I was, you know, the ninth horse back in this movie, as we say in Hollywood. And he treated me as if I were Vic Morrow. I mean, he just was so lovely and so, you know, just paid such careful attention to me. Knew I was new. And it was all so relaxed that at the end of the day, I thought, this isn't like acting. There's no competition here. There's no nervousness. I mean, it's just like talking to people. And I told him that years later. We were reminiscing, and he said, well, you know, we're supposed to be aping people here. You know, that was his comment. And that's what you see so much of in all of his pictures. And he was really, I mean, I learned it all from Bob. I had no real, I went to a big state university and was in the drama department, but, you know, I didn't know anything when I went out there. And he just let me do it and hired me and kind of hung way back, as he does with all his actors. And you know, I learned it all and was very, very spoiled by him. Because I'd get a job every now and then with some guy who wanted me to hit my marks and say the lines, and it was difficult for me to do. You know, the kind of general, as Geraldine said, uncomplicated way of acting, you know, it became kind of difficult. I was always looking for the edge. And so he sort of, I mean, I owe it all to him. And I was very lucky to meet him and think about him all the time whenever I'm working, when I'm not working.
So, yeah, specifically with this campaign, a lot of people think that this campaign was almost like the Jimmy Carter before there was a Jimmy Carter, talking about all these types of, you know, liberal ideas. Did you get a chance to listen to some of the things that the campaign was saying as you were watching, or you didn't necessarily get a chance to focus on it?
No, I absorbed part of it because it definitely felt like some of the things being said were kind of like across the spectrum. But I know getting lawyers out of politics, especially out of like Congress, and making churches pay taxes was like one of the things that he like brings up multiple times, just like over the megaphone, and just like being someone. There's like a line in there about people who don't have money know a lot about money.
Yeah, brilliant thoughts.
People who have a lot don't know that much. And more of them should be out of the system and out of politics and like not have it be so skewed that way. So yeah, there are like a few touchstone things that I felt like it brought up quite a bit. But it was funny that there were some little things like, oh, hey, churches should pay taxes. And then here is like 90 seconds of following this truck around. And he's just kind of like telling a story part of the time. Like it's a mix of like agenda versus just like talking.
Yeah, I find kind of like what you're talking about. So you talked about the church thing sticking out to you, and these different things that kind of live with inside of your brain. I find myself thinking of things that the politician says all the time. So I'm a music teacher. I'm always thinking the thing about the Star Spangled Banner, how that shouldn't be the national anthem, because no one can sing it and no one can remember the words. You know, just some of those thoughts are like, oh, that's kind of a good point. The lawyer thing, like you're talking about, you know, that almost sounds like a Tea Party thing almost now, right? Like now it almost has that kind of connotation, but even for me, I'm like, yeah, that is true. Lawyers are just kind of sent to confuse you, aren't they? Yeah, that is bullshit.
You know what? Oh no.
You're good.
I popped out
this
my
point that changing the national anthem was one of his like 5 points. Like that was like something he was running on, was changing the national anthem.
That's should be easy enough, right? Like,
yeah.
But
for me, a song.
Yeah.
Cool.
Gosh, you know, as we're talking about this, I'm starting to be struck by the gravity of this film and just
the smell of oranges does remind me of Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Isn't that like the first line of the?
Never heard of it.
Yeah. So I don't know. What should we talk about now? Should we talk about some of the cast and some of the casting choices in this film? Maybe.
The cast is very good, and it's interesting. Maybe this is just kind of an Altman thing in general, but listening to Lily Tomlin interviews, like she said that there were various people where the first one that walked in the door, they got the gig. Like the two deaf boys who play her kids. It was just the first two that came in, they got the job. And that happened several times and they still killed it. And like having people just visit the set, end up in the movie in various roles, making cameos as themselves. And then like Lily Tomlin wasn't supposed to originally be that character. Like I'm blanking on her name, but the original actress like knew sign language well. That's part of why that was.
What was her name?
I don't know.
Can't remember.
It was Lily Tomlin's first movie, like first more dramatic role, and she was one of my favorites.
Oh, she's terrific in it. I watched Lily Tomlin in this, and I can't believe it's her first movie. She was primarily known as just a comedic,
She's a comedian.
Yeah, and that's all.
But she was amazing.
Oh, she's so. Not only is she amazing, she's so sensitive. Her characterization is just so sensitive. That's just it always kind of blows my mind.
Part of that might have been her being sensitive in general at the time, because listening to her talk a bunch, she said that watching the dailies after they first filmed the "I'm Easy" scene.
Oh yeah, of course.
When she was watching that, she thought she had butchered it so badly, so that before the lights turned on and they were wrapping up, she left and just went to her. Because she thought she had just fucked it up and that she was going to like ruin the movie and maybe just like have to leave the movie or something. But they had already been very far in. She's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And she got a call like, oh, hey, like it wasn't bad. Like, where are you? Like,
well, Chris, I think you said something that's really important in understanding this movie. You were essentially talking about how, these people would get cast very quickly. And that was something that Altman did a lot. As he kind of alluded to within that quote I had of him, Robert Altman was all about the essence of a person. So it would be very common that he would just be talking to a person and then he'd just say, hey, we should do something together.
Well, Shelley Duvall, we mentioned watching Brewster McCloud. She was like 20 or 21 when she filmed that. He just met her at a party, liked her energy, thought she was interesting. And obviously she went on to do amazing things, but I think there's a lot of value in that because you catch a lot of those human moments like we keep talking about.
Michael Murphy's another one. Michael Murphy's original job was he was just someone that essentially worked for the studios where he would just read scripts for people as they were practicing. So he would just like read lines and he just happened to, someone said, oh, you should go meet my friend Bob. He's a cool guy. You'd like him.
I like how someone saw that and were like, you should play an asshole lawyer and everything.
Yeah. So he goes over, he meets Bob, as they all call him, all the people in his repertory cast all call him Bob. He goes over and they talk for an hour about anything, just whatever. And then he just says, yeah, we should go do something. Come, let's go do a movie. So.
And then Ronnie Blakely, who's probably my favorite in this movie.
What's her name in it again?
Barbara Jean.
How could I not know that? Yeah.
I love her so much.
Were anything she sang.
Oh, beautiful.
Oh, she's amazing. Well, and the cool part of that is that so much of the cast, I think almost every original song that was in here was written by the person who would sing it, except for
the three. Peter, Paul, and Mary. It's not
Peter,
their
Paul,
name.
and Mary. Bill, Tom, and Mary. Since You've Gone. That was written by Gary Busey. Yeah. I know. So anyway, other than that, we'll talk more about Gary Busey, I'm sure. But other than that, the cast would perform their own songs. So Ronnie Blakely started as someone from whom they just bought 2 songs for the movie. I think her 2, Tape Deck and His Tractor and Idaho Home. She wrote those. She was a musician. She'd never acted before. So this was her first movie. And I think it was just, I don't know. I think it was just intuition or perfect human perception or whatever, but he made a great choice.
Actually, do you have the notes within your notes? It's okay if you don't, of the actress that was originally supposed to play that role.
We just talked about that, didn't we?
It doesn't necessarily matter. Anyways, there was someone who was all locked in to do it, but for one reason or another had to get out.
She just didn't. She wanted more money than they could afford.
Oh, that's what it was. Yep. So they lost her.
So well, we've already bought a couple songs from this lady. Let's use her.
Yeah, and then Bobby just said, what's that?
Bobby.
What's the name of the person who sang the songs?
Ronnie.
He said, let Ronnie do it.
Yeah.
So, and what's crazy, Ronnie So we're talking about the fact that she had never acted in her life before and is in this major movie. She ended up writing a huge role. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. She not only had this huge role, she was given the permission to write key scenes in this film. So for instance, the breakdown scene where her character breaks down. Leads up to the
on the riverboat show.
Yeah, it's kind of like her last moment. All of that was something that she wrote. It was 2 pages in her notebook, and she came to him and said, "Hey, listen, I've got this idea. Can I try it?" And he said, "Oh, just go shoot it. If we don't like it, we won't do it."
That was always his rule. It sounds like if try it. If I don't like it, then what I say goes. But he would always let people try.
And he didn't want to get into it. People would want to come up to him and like tell him the whole idea, and he's like, just go do it. That was his whole thing, which is so cool. And so the
musicians didn't know. The Alan Garfield playing her husband didn't necessarily know, but he kept saying in the commentary, and correct me if I understood this incorrectly, but he would just say like, they got it. They got right away what she was doing, and they all did a fantastic job of kind of playing along with it.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to be talking about more of the actors and everything throughout our analysis of this film. I think one thing that might kind of help with it is understanding how the movie is kind of arranged, or what Altman's kind of vision was with it. Hannah had said this previously, that this movie is filmed very similarly to a documentary. That's actually probably the closest thing that you could say this movie, how it works in terms of how it was shot. Essentially what they did all throughout Nashville, they would set up these huge events, and then people from the town would come and populate the scenes, and they would have cameras throughout. It didn't necessarily make it sound like it was a huge amount of cameras, right? Did they say basically they used 2 throughout the whole thing?
No, I think there were, like, even in the last pivotal scene, I think he mentioned there being 5 different cameramen walking around. And even then, they had to like keep people coming into the Parthenon by like offering cheap hot dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and actually, that's probably the best example of this particular technique that exists in this movie, is the Parthenon scene at the end. Essentially, they needed to have just so many people filling up that. They wanted thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So like Candace said, they offered free hot dogs. They were going to have free music for the people in Nashville. Guess what happens the day of? Huge thunderstorms. All throughout the day. They're just like, fuck.
And they have no money to... rent the park.
It has to be that day, and it has to be within these hours. They're going to fill this, we're filming the end of the movie, but all, in Altman fashion, the clouds happened to part, and they had essentially 2 hours to get the assassination scene, and it just worked, like so many of these scenes happened based on that particular kind of thing. And I think you feel it in the movie. I think the movie has such an energy, because us as the viewer, we definitely don't know what we're even looking at, through that first part of the film. Did you feel like that when you watched it? Were you like, what am I supposed to be paying attention to here?
Yeah, and then it took maybe 40 minutes in before I was like, oh, like, I don't need to be looking as intently as it was different things. Like, I could just like sit back and appreciate just whatever is happening. I don't need to analyze as much as I thought I was going to have to try to, because with that documentary kind of quality, it does just feel like you're watching life.
Yeah.
More or less. Yeah.
Well, and he would use different parts of people's characters, like their natural characteristics. So, and kind of through his technique of casting, of kind of getting an idea of the essence of what a person is, he would have very observant and astute observations based on the characteristic of the person. A good example of that is Carradine's character. What was it? Tom? Is he Tom? He's asshole.
Tom.
Yeah, he's Tom.
Yeah.
He's Tom yes. Catting around throughout the whole movie. Anyways, yeah, he's the
you know the one with the tan lines on his butt.
Yeah, that's right. Tan line Tom. Anyways, he had such a major problem with this movie because he obviously has a huge role that he plays in this, but he kept going up to Altman and just saying, "Listen, man, I don't know how to, I hate this character. I don't like this type of person. This is not the type of person that I would associate with.
And if you see the person he played in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, it's such a switch. Anyway, diametric opposition.
Yeah, it's hilarious. And then to think that, you know, he kind of jokingly says, like, I don't want to take credit for Nashville, but I do know that Altman heard me singing some of my songs. It's Easy being one of them.
I'm Easy,
excuse me.
Which was the only Oscar awarded to this film.
Which is insane. Yeah, it's so crazy.
Out of like 11 nominations or something crazy like that.
Yeah, he said he didn't want to take credit for the film, but he knew that Altman was watching him sing it and sing these songs, and it kind of, he felt germinated the idea in his head. I can't imagine as a songwriter myself having some of my music, you know, performing my music as this character that I hated. So he says the reason when you're watching Tom throughout this movie kind of being this asshole, you're not really watching someone being an asshole. You're actually watching an actor who hates what they're doing. So Altman was so creative in thinking how he could get these different things from people based on what he knew about their personalities.
Well, and too, like Karen Black, a lot of the cast was pissed that she got to come in and stay for a week in a nice hotel and kind of had the star treatment.
Because they were all living more or less within
singles
bunkers.
Apartments.
Yeah, it was like hangout
places.
ancestral. Yeah, sorry, keep going. I need to say that.
So they all had they were there for 2 months. They had these kind of, not shitty, but just like not what they're used to living conditions. And then Karen Black gets to breeze in for a week and do her thing. And when someone complains, his response is like, oh, you're not supposed to like her.
So he was always in charge behind the scenes, kind of like, okay, this person, we could do this. And it's just fascinating. Yeah, it's just
Sulene Gay, we talked about her. Gwen Wells, who apparently was in California Split, a film that I've heard come up a ton in regards to this movie, but I haven't seen personally.
I think mainly because a lot of the actors were in that film.
I saw that she was one from that cast. Just the fact that she was not a singer and they spent all this time on vocal lessons. And just that was the result, because Altman maintains that you couldn't take a good singer and make them sing poorly. That's
actually even maybe a little bit more tragic than how you're explaining. Joan Tewksbury was saying Sulene Gay, everyone kind of loved her on set, but she was so earnest, and she was just like, oh, I'm gonna make sure to get these singing lessons, and I want to do the best that I can. And Joan was just saying to her, what in the fuck are you doing? That is not what this character is supposed to be. But as Hannah said, Altman kind of knew that you can't train someone to sing.
Wade being the only voice of reason at the end.
Oh God, that's so great. Yeah. That's okay. So that's another thing with all of Altman's movies. He's not afraid to put in just these huge moments of tragedy, like so much so that it like disturbs you for the rest of your life. I would almost be willing to say that, I'd be curious to hear what you guys think, is the most tragic thing that happens in Nashville her on that stage singing and like half stripping at the end?
It was for me.
I feel the same.
Just like her expression the entire time, like how deflated you can see her get when she's like did a song and people were into it. She's like dancing around a little bit and still like fully clothed, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna do another one. And then they turn on her so quickly. She's like, what's going on? Like her like arc just in that 5 minutes was the most tragic thing for me. And then even when she does like strip, she's just doing it fairly awkwardly, and she does just literally remove her clothes and then leave.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think maybe what strikes me as so tragic about that, I've never been assassinated. That hasn't happened to me, but I've been deeply embarrassed before, or just like felt like, ugh, I thought I was this and I have no business doing that. There's something about the humanness of that scene that hits you so hard, of just like, I've never done exactly that, but I've felt similar before.
Well, and Joan Tewksbury mentions that that's kind of a common thread with the characters, where you might have to help me with this, but essentially, Sulene Gay wants so badly to be Barbara Jean. She wants to be a country star. She wants to be a legitimate singer. So when she's in the situation where she's supposed to strip, it's like, well, I don't have to take off all of my clothes. She kind of mentions that a lot of people in the script are in a similar situation where they have to, I'm paraphrasing here, but they kind of have to give up a part of themselves to reach what they think is their goal, but that's not necessarily. And is that fair?
Yeah,
Is that essentially the idea?
Yeah, exactly.
So there are a lot of those moments where you have really cool connections between what you think a character is and what they become based on that exact situation. So Haven Hamilton, Henry Gibson, singing that kind of cheesy keep it going, ends up embodying that character at the end. Like his true self is shown at the end when Barbara Jean is shot, and he tries to keep everything together and kind of ignores his own well-being for everybody else.
And all the characters throughout the movie are just always trying to get ahead in some type of way, which ultimately I think is kind of, Robert Altman, that was kind of the metaphor that he was kind of getting at within the United States. It's like this idea of prosperity that exists within the United States.
Barbara Jean's husband kind of pushing her to perform when she obviously shouldn't be, when she wasn't in a mental state to do so.
Yeah, you could almost do it with each character if we wanted to.
So great, we have 23 to go.
Yeah. Michael Murphy, obviously, he's a part of this campaign, and he's trying to further the politician, but then maybe both of them. He's kind of responsible for both of the tragedies. He's the only person in the seemingly gay bar scene who's sitting there just like, oh, I've taken this too far, having this poor girl. While everyone else is just like, yeah, like they're just so happy and goofy, clapping and all that stuff. He's the one that's like totally mortified. And ultimately, at the end of the film, he's just as responsible for her assassination as anyone else. Mm-hmm. What's the name of the trio again? Once again, everybody, I'm not good at script stuff. Who?
Bill, Tom, and Mary.
Why would the Mary says as the Murph man's coming to proposition them to go and perform? She's basically saying, well, we're Democrats, we're not going to go or whatever it is, right? Well, like
we're just Democrats, we can't.
Yeah. So there's always people
but they want to be on that stage.
Yeah, they're all kind of showing their true colors and trying to get ahead.
Again, I mean, I know it's another Suline Gay, but that's her ultimate saving grace, is just that. And that's what's so sad, is that she expects to perform with Barbara Jean at the Parthenon, and then she doesn't get to.
Oh, I've never thought of that.
She's like waiting in line to have her moment. And then the only one who... Oh, go ahead, Chris.
There are two characters throughout the movie trying to be singers, and it's the other person who can sing, but that gets the mic at the end.
Yeah.
And she's just still sitting there at the side of the stage, just like, sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even the Tom character, by all accounts, he's with all the ladies. He's got the successful songs, but he's still chasing some kind of deeply resentful part that exists inside of him, and he's not 100% satisfied with life. You honestly could. Like, we would bore everybody by trying to do each one of the characters, but I haven't even thought about any of these things, but it's like so obvious to me now, like talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So... yeah.
No, let's muse. We have a couple more hours to go.
How do we feel about the character as they're credited as being Tricycle Man?
Oh,
how do we feel about Jeff Goldblum?
I love Jeff Goldblum at all times, always.
He's a 10 out of 10 in the movie. Is that a serious question? I can't think of anything that I dislike about that character in this movie.
I didn't dislike any of it either. He's just like so interesting and eccentric and weird, and like his magic and stuff is great, and he just kind of shows up and gives people rides and stuff, but
puts too much fucking salt on his salad.
Yeah. But like, who is he? Like, out of the 24 characters, he's the one where I don't think we could sit and be like, oh, this is what they gave up for what they wanted. He's just there.
He was supposed to be like a mythical creature. That was kind of the idea behind it. Just someone that, they have some kind of essence or power, but you don't exactly know what it was. But he would be interwoven throughout all the scenes. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, because he has virtually no backstory. But when you have that scene of Opal, who may or may not actually work for the BBC, that Geraldine Chaplin character, she's wandering around the junkyard and the buses, like the bus barn and everything. He's there with his motorcycle parked and he's shaving, like implicating that
right.
He like lives on a bus or something. But otherwise he has no dialogue. He's literally just there to like weave between the scenes and locations, and that's probably all it is, because I mean, that's another thing, is Altman was notoriously bad at continuity because he didn't care.
Yeah, but let's talk about this. Okay, I've said essence too many times. This is now officially a drinking game. But, we're talking about this is how he cast. Think of, was it Tricycle Man? That's his name?
Yeah.
Tricycle Man. And now think of everything that you understand about Jeff Goldblum in person. Every interview you've ever heard this man talk, he is whimsy on a cracker.
Yeah.
So it's funny to think that he met Jeff Goldblum at some point and thought, you know what, motherfucker, you need to get on that tricycle and do some magic tricks.
Do you remember him in Annie Hall?
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. He has one line in that.
What does he say? I forget what he says.
He's on the phone. He says, "Oh, I forgot my mantra." He's like calling up a spiritual guide for mantra.
He's so terrific in it. Guys, we love Nashville so much. I feel like we could just keep talking on and on about it. Does anyone have anything else that they want to say? Honestly, if you haven't seen this film, you just have to watch it. I was talking to Elliot Imes, friend of the show, who was on the previous episode of The Master. I was just telling him, I'm like, Elliot, this is easily just one of the greatest American films ever made. I can't really think of anything else to say, right? Do you agree? Disagree?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. It's almost physically painful to me that I feel like you're moving ahead, because I'm like, no, we haven't talked about Mr. Green, the old man, and his wife.
Oh, there's another tragedy.
Martha L.A. Jones. Like, we have that really tragic moment. We haven't talked about the kind of dichotomy with the soldier and the assassin. I guess I'll just call him openly, with the violin case. How those two are kind of played off each other the whole movie. But then I noticed the assassin's like leaning on a trash can watching Barbara Jean while the soldier's like in her room keeping watch over. Anyway, just all these crazy...
That guy stops him at the end too. He's the one who... Yeah,
and he's the one who's right next to him. So it's just... And this is the guy that Keith Carradine said, like, oh, have you killed anybody this week? There are so many like fascinating little moments that like... It's hard not to talk about them, because this movie is shot in such a way that I feel like I just lived in it for a couple of hours. And that's, I think, going back to the beginning, that's why I like this so much, because I feel like it's a world I live in. I feel like if I ever visit Nashville, I'll probably be disappointed because it's not 1975 Opryland, Ronnie Blakely, Nashville. Anyway, there's just such a human element that I feel like we probably could talk about for hours, but not really nail on the head.
Well, and I think something else, maybe more than any other film that we've done, if you were to ask me about The Dark Knight Rises, I could say this happens, and this happens. This isn't a movie where that necessarily works, because it's so experience based. You have to have the experience of experiencing the scene, feeling what it was that the director was trying to have come across you, that it becomes difficult to even discuss, because you have to experience this film.
Yeah.
I think we would be remiss not to talk for a second just about the music. This movie, they set out to make this amazing soundtrack, and they got a whole lot more because of that. The soundtrack is just phenomenal. All of the songs were recorded live. Mm-hmm. So when you actually listen to the soundtrack, they actually had a little van outside with all of the recording equipment. There's mistakes in the songs. There's moments where people's voices don't 100% like nail, it's like pitchy, or they get weird little frogs in their throat. The reality of that enhances the scenes so much. What is it? Like, there's an hour of music in this film? Is that right?
Yeah, it's a third of the movie.
Altman himself actually characterized this film as his musical. He thought of it as a musical. And it's certainly one of the most effective musicals I've ever seen in that way.
Richard Baskin did all the sounds production?
He did the production, but also he was in charge of hiring all the musicians. He
co-wrote a lot of the songs.
Yeah, a lot of them he just straight up wrote, I think, too.
Yeah.
For instance, I don't want to say him in case I'm wrong, but he was a brilliant person. He was smart enough
He was Frog.
He was Frog, yep. He's in the movie.
I want a pig.
Yeah, that's another weird thing. All the weird animal names that exist throughout this. Did you enjoy that? That seems like something you'd like, Chris.
Yeah, well, and between Frog being named Frog and then just looking like Slash before Slash existed, I was like, what?
He's cool looking.
Who is this dude?
There's someone named Trout in the movie. They talk about Trout.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, and it was played by Merle Kilgore. So.
Merle Kilgore.
Oh my God! No, there's if for you literary people, there's a Kurt Vonnegut reoccurring character called Kilgore Trout.
I hear.
There was a play on that.
Okay, I did hear this. Okay, yeah.
Well, good.
But for being someone who strongly dislikes country, I loved this music. Like I texted you two earlier, I listened to the soundtrack today. A few of my favorites were 1, I Love You. 2, I'm Thinking of You. I'm Easy, because also that scene is just fantastic. And then It Don't Worry Me, how the movie closes. And
you're a Keith
kind of going
Carradine
back
fan.
to like tragic moments. Like the reason why that strip scene kind of hurts me a little bit more is because that still like ends on a bummer. Where after the assassination, it's just like, oh wait, like keep carrying on. Like pretend this is normal. Like this isn't Dallas. This is Nashville. They can't do that to us here. Somebody sing. And then one of the people trying to be a star gets her moment and sings this beautiful song, and people still kind of stick around and sing along and continue about the day. Mm-hmm. So somehow like the moment being a bigger thing, like an assassination versus embarrassment, still like ends on a positive note through music. So I think it doesn't like hurt as much.
Well, I think it also ends within that kind of bittersweet thing. That's when it gets to the artistic moment of the movie. It's like image-wise, plus your own memory of what just happened, plus the song that's happening. You have so many emotions inside of you operating on so many levels. You've lived, like Hannah said, you've lived with these characters as nearly for 3 hours. The characters develop in such a way that they feel like they're a part of you, right?
Yes.
They feel like family. It's just one of those things. You just love them all so much. Even Tricycle Man. It's interesting to think though, all of the Nashville people, when they were down there recording, they were just like, they were so happy they were in their town. They're like, even some of them were kind of hip. Like they understood that they were making like a satirical take on it. But Lily Tomlin herself, as she was watching the dailies, was saying like, because she had Southern roots, she was like, you can't show this to people down south. They're going to be really upset by like seeing you kind of making fun of them or whatever. But basically, all of the people in Nashville were so pissed at the music. They were just like, this is not real Nashville music.
But it wasn't supposed to be good. That's the other thing
Yes.
I like about the soundtrack. It wasn't supposed to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I think Altman said that maybe 15 years after there was this resurgence where then all of a sudden, Nashville embraced this movie. But at the time they just wanted, what was it? They wanted just their own people writing those songs, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's what it was. Yeah, that's basically what he said. He said they were just all mad that we didn't use their songs. So, listen, this movie is an absolute treasure. You have to see it. You'd be hard-pressed to see another movie that's like it. There's been some that have imitated it, but no one has gotten as pure and to what this movie is. So for me, not wanting to see it because I loved Magnolia so much, this movie far surpasses Magnolia.
You're a fool, Dustin.
I was a fool, and I'm glad that I jumped in. So obviously the legacy of this film, it just 100% changed what a movie could be about. People like, I referenced Paul Thomas Anderson. Paul Thomas Anderson has openly said, I've stole from Robert Altman just like everyone else has. Like it's known.
Cast, style, technicalities. Yeah.
And did you know that actually the end of There Will Be Blood, Paul Thomas Anderson actually dedicates that film to him?
Well, the timing. I mean, he worked with Altman on Pray Home Companion. Did we talk about that?
No, we haven't talked about it.
That's such an important story. He was kind of his He wasn't an AD, but he was.
He was actually. It's even worse than that. He had heart problems. Actually, when he got his honorary Oscar, which he never earned one. Isn't that crazy? He just got an honorary Oscar after all these amazing films. He at that point he had a heart transplant for like the past 10 years. He didn't want anyone to know about it because he knew they wouldn't let him direct things. So by the time, I mean, he was nearing, I think, like 90 years old by the time he did Prairie Home Companion. They had real concerns that he would die. So the insurance company made sure that they had a director on set in case they had to take over, and Paul Thomas Anderson was that person.
He was only 81.
Well, there you go. Hyperbole. A little hyperbole never hurt anybody.
Hyperbole.
Yeah.
But old with a heart transplant.
Yeah.
That's no joke.
But, you know, like for Paul Thomas Anderson, him working with Robert Altman 100% changed his movies. So leading up to that point, I think he had just finished Magnolia and he was going to start doing what he was going to do Punch Drunk Love. And Punch Drunk Love in his films,
which Chris and I saw together in the theater.
Yeah. It's kind of the turning point in his movies. It's like, you know, from there it's Punch Drunk Love and then There Will Be Blood, The Master. It kind of goes into this whole different, you know, like new cinema kind of thing. Wouldn't have happened if it wouldn't have been for Altman. One of Altman's biggest quotes was he really learned to give in and giggle, which we've kind of talked about throughout all of this, his ability to, you know, improvise and everything like that. So, one thing that people have said, there's a lot of things that have been stolen from Altman, but all of the great directors since, there's one characteristic that doesn't exist in all of the current directors. So, you know, talking about a Sofia Coppola, talking about a Wes Anderson, Paul Thomas Anderson, so on and so forth, none of them have such an eye for satire, this highly politicized kind of sentiment. They've stole all kinds of things, but not very many of them have kind of continued that piece of them, which I thought was kind of an interesting thing.
Real satire is hard.
Man, he nails it though, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Should we name a couple other films that we love of his for anyone who's interested in that?
Yeah, if you want to feel like shit for a week, how about you check out some Shortcuts?
Oh, Shortcuts is so undeniably amazing, but God, it makes you feel bad. I saw it, you know, I don't know if I could ever watch it again. It just makes you feel that
I'm
bad.
Good.
Yeah. We love McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Oh my God, yes we do.
McCabe and Mrs. Miller was the last movie we watched, and then the next night Anna had a baby, so...
So I watched McCabe and Mrs. Miller, and then I had Phoebe, and we listened to Leonard Cohen in the hospital.
It was so great. So I have so many wonderful memories with that. We're watching Brewster McCloud right now and loving it. You have to see that, I'd say.
Do I feel a little weird? 3 Women?
3 Women's one of my favorites. Shelley Duvall kills it in that movie.
I watched the trailer because I wanted to get like a little bit of a sense of what some of his other movies are like. So I watched a trailer for that and McCabe and Mrs. whatever.
Miller. Yeah, watch that and then text us when you're watching it so we can watch it too.
We just finished, we saw Gosford Park, which is really interesting, where he kind of takes on this huge cast kind of vibe. But it is a very English drama. Would you say?
I would agree.
Yeah. We're forgetting some key things that you should see, but I would certainly recommend Secret Honor. I think that's really interesting.
I would not necessarily, unless you... Just kidding. It was fine. I don't need to watch it again, though.
Oh, but if you like watching just an amazing actor, God, that movie is just...
so if you can watch one person acting their butt off, and you like theater, you'll like it a lot.
Yeah, it's like a chamber piece kind of thing. It's cool. I think
MASH can't endorse that one. I don't really like MASH.
I don't really like MASH either. Do you like MASH?
I like the show.
I like the show.
But the movie doesn't have like the same like energy.
It's very sexist. The sexism in MASH, the film, is really troubling.
I feel like Altman's really good at having the joke on the right person in every movie except for MASH.
Yeah,
which maybe I need to rewatch it, but...
No, it doesn't hold up. It does hold up. Like, I understand the significance of it in the film world, but yeah, it's not my favorite at all. With that, I suppose we should conclude our conversation of Nashville. Me and Hannah could certainly continue. Please continue the conversation via all the social media. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was actually quite the challenge to do this.
It's hard.
It's hard. This one was a brain scratcher, I feel, but...
And it was really hard not to sing the whole time.
Yeah.
The song was so good.
I think with this...
Gary Busey, Chris.
How did that happen?
He was going to play Tom.
No.
Yeah, I know. Okay, anyway.
Yeah. I think at this point, Chris, we are on pins and needles to hear what the next film is going to be.
Well, so we have had like a little discourse. We're going to go with Wes Anderson because The Lantern has screened 2 Wes Anderson movies, but we haven't talked about any on the podcast before. And the 2 that we've screened have been a big deal for me personally. Bottle Rocket has become one of my absolute faves of his, and that was the last movie that The Lantern did before I was a part of it.
Crazy.
And Dustin, you gave me a poster at that show and wrote "Thanks, Chris" on the back. Just gave me that. And then we did Tenenbaums, which was my first, like one of my first public speaking engagements, basically.
And you ran that event, like that was your baby. Well, we had our baby.
Baby. You had just had Phoebe like 2 weeks earlier. So you two had a lot going on in your lives and couldn't have as big a role as you normally would there. So those are 2 movies that I love and have very good Lantern experiences with, but neither of them is my favorite Wes Anderson movie. So we're going to talk about my favorite, which I don't think is a lot of people's favorites, Moonrise Kingdom.
Yay!
We love that movie.
I'm so excited to talk about that and rewatch it.
One thing I'm excited about, and I'm sure we'll get into it, I think Moonrise Kingdom is one of those movies that's oftentimes within directors, they have these films that are kind of like considered the lost one or just one that's often forgotten about. I think Moonrise Kingdom kind of falls into that with Wes Anderson, and I think there's a lot to be discussed within that film. So I guess with that, we'll, hopefully we'll have that ready to go for everyone next week. Please like and specifically give us some reviews. It really helps a lot. So hope you enjoyed Nashville as much as we did, and keep it going.
Keep it going.
So long,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
It was interesting, though. I am a local Hollywood, California girl, born and raised there, and working at the studios. I had no acting aspirations whatsoever, and working at the studios was just like a job. You'd pick up here and there and here and there. Sometimes swimming jobs, sometimes standing in, sometimes working extra, sometimes doing a lot of other things that were all very legitimate. So I got a call one day, and the casting director that called me said, "God, you're really going to like this guy. His name's Robert Altman. He's your kind of guy. He's got the same kind of sense of humor. You're really going to get along." And we're really early, 6 o'clock in the morning, and a bus up into the hot hills of the valley of San Fernando. And I stepped off I guess I should tell this. Should I tell it?
Sure, go ahead.
I thought maybe it's getting boring by this time. But, so I stepped off and I was kind of hungover. I really wasn't feeling great. And I stepped off the bus, and the assistant director was standing there, and the director, which was unheard of. And it was real hot up there, and the director didn't have his shirt on, and he had a wet rag on his head, and I thought, this is a guy, so the assistant director introduced me, and he said, "Catherine, we'd like you to meet Bob Altman." And he looked right at me as I was going down those stairs, and he said, "How are your morals?" And I said, "A little shaky. How are yours?" And then he followed me over to the coffee making. And he put milk in, half a cup of milk and half a cup of coffee, and he said, "Let's have a cappuccino." That was the beginning of 47 years of marriage.
I've never seen a bad performance in one of your films. Is there a trade secret to that?
Yeah, I hire good actors.
But how do you know? If you're introducing people?
I don't know how I know. I think that primarily I don't restrict the actors, and I allow them to do what they can do or what they will do. In fact, I insist on it, and I don't restrict their performance in any way. I am very proud of that, and because they're the ones. I think that by the time a film is cast, that about 85% of my creative work is finished, because the actors have to do it from then on. And of all the accolades that can be given, from the Nobel Prize to the Medal of Honor to the Golden Globes, none of them will ever mean or can mean as much to me as the Venice Film Festival this year. The Best Actor Award went to the entire cast of Streamers, and that is unprecedented, and it's smart, and it's just, and it'll never happen again. And but I hope it would start a trend, because this Academy Award thing, where you have to pick out one, you have to have a star in order to make a film. It has to be about one person, and you do an ensemble piece like Streamers or Nashville or McCabe, in spite of Warren Beatty, was an ensemble piece. MASH, all of those films, and you suddenly you're locked out of this of being recognized by your peers, because they have these little rules set up.